Hey, this is Psi-Blocker here for another edition of Good Cards You Never Used. And this week we have Psi-Blocker. Psi-Blocker is a secret rare out of the new Star Strike Blast set. It's Wind type, level 4, Psychic type, and its effect is once per turn you can declare one card name. Cards with that name and their effects cannot be used until the end of your opponent's next turn. Now, this is especially good in stun decks, because stun decks, a lot of times you have your setup and one card would be a lot of trouble to use. So you can either call that card, or it gives you the ability to call a key card in their deck and slow your opponent down. For example, in one of my decks I use this, I often first turn call Lone Fire Blossom against plant decks, stuff like that. If you know the common opening play, you can prevent it. Now, some of the weaknesses of this card is it only has 1200 attack, and that's pretty weak for a level 4 monster. You're going to have to protect it with something. You can't just leave it out there by itself, whether that be something like a Threatening Roar or Bottomless Trap Hole or something. You can't just summon it and leave it out there. It can get run over by a lot. Now, there's a lot of confusion on what exactly this effect means. It's not the same as Prohibition, which was what people were first led to believe. Prohibition has a lot of weird rulings on it, like, I don't even know them all right now, but, for example, you can't use them to pay costs and stuff like that. Basically, Psi-Blocker is a much simpler version of that effect. Basically, you can't play it from your hand, so say you called Yours, they couldn't summon it, called Heavy Storm, they couldn't play Heavy Storm, and cards with that card's effect can't be activated either. So that means that if it's an activating effect, it also cannot be activated. So something like Royal Oppression or a flipped Raikou, things that activate cannot activate. Now, this doesn't stop continuous effects, like you can't call Royal Decree or any other continuous effect because they don't activate and you're not technically using the effect. Now, it's also nice because it's until your opponent's next turn, so protects you on your turn and your opponent's turn, and then when it gets around to yours, you're allowed to call a new card with Psi-Blocker. Another neat thing about Psi-Blocker is if he leaves the field, his effect is still active. So if you use his effect and then tribute him, or your opponent destroys him, they can't use the card effect during main phase 2, or if they somehow get around him somehow, his effect sticks. Now that's very useful, because that means, like, say you summon him and call priority, and then attack with him, you don't have to worry about getting mirror forced, and your opponent can use whatever card you're trying to stop. Now, this is a very skill-heavy card. If you're new to the game, it's definitely not a card I would recommend, because you really have to know not only your deck and what would hurt you at this moment, but your opponent's deck and what would hurt them most to call, or what they're most likely to play. This is definitely a card that the better you are and the longer you've played the game and the more you know the meta decks of the format is going to be much more useful to you. That being said, for the more experienced players out there, this is a great card, especially against decks that have big one-turn plays and low attack monsters, mostly being the Plant Synchro deck that seems to be running rampant right now. Summon first turn, call Lone Fire Blossom, that leaves them with a very few ridiculous opening plays they can use. Or call Raikou and attack their face down, it's a pretty good chance that's going to be it. Or against Gravekeepers, if you go first, call Necro Valley, and they're going to have a tough time recovering if you have just a little bit of protection for Psi-Blocker. I don't know, it's a great card. Try it out yourself. Once again, this is Psi-Blocker. Please subscribe.